Can you hear me?
No.
Where's John Nixon? I need John Nixon here. I'm gonna have to tell. Oh, there he is! Can you hear me, John? Perfect. Great. Last week we had a little bit of feedback from some members of the audience that there were people in the audience using their phones to record slides, and it was distracting to their neighbors. So if you want to take a picture or use your phone, just be respectful of the people around you, please. Thank you. My name is Jenny Hart, and I'm on the board of the Ouray County Historical Society. I do the historic tours on Fridays. This week's historic tour on Friday at 4:30 will be focusing on buildings in and near Oak Street. So we will go to the Western Hotel and learn about its full history. And we'll go visit the site of the old depot, which is no longer there. We will get to visit the Metals cabin on Oak Street, which is really cool because there's only been 3 families to ever own that building. And then we will go learn about the power plant at the south end of Oak Street. So I hope you can join me. We have a couple more historic walking tours into mid-August. We have a corkscrew turntable hike coming up soon on August 9th, and I will be helping with that one too. We do some car shuttling. We park our cars down at the low end of the hike, and we shuttle people up to the higher end. We do a hike that's about 2 miles, and we hike on the railroad grade, and we learn about the history of the stops up there and the towns that used to exist up at Ironton. And we finish at the ruins, I'm gonna say ruins because it's really in ruins, of the old turntable that helped the trains turn around and head back in the other direction. So if you're interested in any of those, please contact the museum and get your name on the list. We also have some cemetery tours in both Ouray and Ridgewood. And finally, in early September, we have a Red Mountain Jeeping tour that we're going to be doing, and we provide the Jeeps. They are sponsored by one of the generous Jeep companies in town. Switzerland of America. And we'll have 2 Jeeps, and we'll fill them with folks, and then we'll do some cool driving up around on Red Mountain and learning about the history that way too. So if you're interested, come check it out. We have an important acknowledgement for the trustees of the Frank L. Massard Trust. They are generous sponsors of the Evenings of History events, and we are super grateful to them for underwriting this programming. Also grateful to all of you for your presence here tonight, and also your patronage of our museum, or should we say the Hist Society Museum. Too soon? Okay, without much ado, let's introduce our speakers. Kurt Wells is a 4th generation Coloradoan and has a lifelong passion for baseball. He's on the board of directors of the Society for American Baseball Research's Rocky Mountain chapter, the SABR. I'll hold it up now. In the late 1980s, he co-hosted Denver Radio's sports talk show promoting bringing Major League Baseball to Denver. Kurt was subsequently appointed as a loaned executive to the Colorado Baseball Commission to support the efforts in the award of the Colorado Rockies franchise. Mr. Wells has hosted 14 Colorado Rockies players staying in his home from 2001 to 2013, including Matt Holliday, Clint Barnes, and Charlie Blackman. Kurt received his bachelor's degree in business administration from the University of Northern Colorado and an MBA in finance and accounting from Regis University. He has recently retired from a long career in corporate finance. Congratulations. He also loves spending time with his wife, 3 children, and 2 grandchildren. Kurt also enjoys performing live solo shows, playing guitar and singing. John Salvino is president of the Rocky Mountain chapter of the Society for American Baseball Research. He is a lifelong baseball fan who enjoys the connections that are made because of the game as much as the game itself. He finds beauty in the game because of how it allows people to connect with it and with each other in so many different ways. His earliest memories include piling into the family station wagon and taking road trips from Southern California to watch his uncle's college games in what seemed to be very far away locations. The love of the game, as well as the love of the road, have never left him, as he and his 2 teenage sons have traveled to 45 states together, stopping at many baseball stadiums and other related sites along the way. John works professionally for a nonprofit health plan focused on finding accessible, equitable, and affordable health care for Coloradoans. That sounds like a tall order. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Where'd they come from? Where did we come from? You don't believe how many guys wanted to play here. We had to beat them off with a stick.
Hey, that's Smoky Joe Wood. And Mel Ott. And Gil Hodges.
And Ty Cobb wanted to play.
That, of course, is from The Field of Dreams, which I think is the best movie ever. But anyway, a guy walks into a bar, and he's got a dog with him. And they belly up to the bar, take a couple seats. The bartender says, "Sorry, but no dogs are allowed in the bar." And this guy says, "Just a second, you don't understand. This dog not only talks, but he really knows baseball." And so the bartender says, "Okay, show me he knows how to talk and show me he knows his baseball." So the guy looks at his dog and he says, "Who's the greatest combined hitter and pitcher in the history of baseball?" The dog looks at him and says, "Ruth." And the bartender says, "Take your dog and get out of here." So they walk out of the bar, they get out on the street. The dog apologetically looks up to his owner and says, "I guess I should have gone with Smoky Joe Wood, huh?" We may run a little short. I'd planned 2 or 3 minutes for the laughter to die down. Actually, I'm going to go long if anything, so I'm going to try to make this fast. My speech today is going to feature ex-Major League Baseball player Smoky Joe Wood, who lived in Ouray from 1900 to 1905, from the time he was 10 till he was 15. He was almost 16 when he moved away. And although he's not in the Hall of Fame due to injuries and longevity of his career, my main goal is to show you what an incredible treasure you've got from the town of Ouray here. Walked around town, I got here yesterday afternoon, and I can't find many people that have ever heard of him, but I think if you're all at the baseball field and somebody looks at Smoky Joe Wood Field, and they say, "Who the heck's this Smoky Joe Wood character?" You're going to say, "I'm glad you asked." I'm going to educate you today and get you where you feel like you know who he is, and what a treasure you've got in this town. I'm also going to talk briefly, if I have time, about a little other Colorado baseball history and some other players from Colorado. Let's see. Along with the introductions that we did, I just want to mention back there filming. We're part of this SABRE group, the Society of American Baseball Research. Filming, we've got Erica Block, who's in town from New York, and Erica is with SABRE, but she's also works covering the Mets. She was with the Yankees, the Yes Channel with the Yankees. Now she's with the Mets. Another real baseball fanatic like John and I are. So before I get into the details of Joe's early years, which I'll take you through his time in Ouray and so forth, I think it's important that you understand what an incredible player he was. It's exciting with a town like this just to have a player who is from the town, but you've got one of the all-time greats here. First of all, let's answer the question, why Smoky Joe? And a term in baseball, when you really throw a good fastball, is he throws smoke. And in Smoky Joe's case, there was a writer named Paul Shannon from the Boston Post who gave him the nickname Smoky for his ability to throw at blazing fast speeds. Players didn't call him Smoky. They referred to him as Woody, as they do typically with a player whose last name is Wood. Walter Johnson, back when he was pitching, was considered to be one of the 3 greatest pitchers at that time, along with, in my opinion, Smoky Joe during his prime years, and probably Christy Mathewson. But Walter Johnson it was considered at that time, and still is, one of the greatest, if not the greatest pitcher of all time. His fastball was legendary, and his name is always mentioned in discussions with the fastest pitcher ever. And he was asked about Smoky Joe, and his quote was, "Can I throw harder than Joe Wood? Listen, my friend, There's no man alive that can throw harder than Smoky Joe Wood. This is the guy from your town. The second thing about him that you need to know right off the bat, you're giving away the punchline already, but yeah, I want you to know as I'm speaking, he was really a great player. He, in 1912, which was the year Fenway Park opened, he was pitching for the Red Sox, and he had arguably the greatest season a pitcher's ever had. He went 34-5 that year, which means in the games he pitched, he was credited for being the winning pitcher 34 times, only 5 times for losses. Now, it's been since 1968, when Denny McClain won 31 games, since anybody has won 30 games in the major leagues. Now, the game's changed a little bit. Pitchers don't throw as many games, they don't throw as many innings, but still, 34-5 is truly remarkable. He also struck out 258 batters that year and had an ERA of 1.91. Let me explain ERA, because there's a lot of you in the room that don't know what that means, and I'm going to be using that term some. It's really probably the best measure they use to determine how successful a pitcher is. ERA stands for earned run average. And basically, a pitcher may throw, it's measuring how many runs the pitcher gives up over every 9 innings he pitches. So maybe over the season or his career, they say he gave up whatever number of runs earned in that time. An unearned run would be one that scores based on an error that somebody makes in the field, and he wouldn't have scored otherwise, so it shouldn't be charged to the pitcher. It wasn't his fault. But he had a 1.91 ERA that year, meant less than 2 runs for every 9 innings he pitched. He also, in addition to that, had a 290 batting average. And pitchers in Major League Baseball are really bad hitters for the most part. I mean, they really aren't good hitters. And to hit 290 as a pitcher is really incredible. And even as a hitter, if you do that, that's really something. So he did that as well. Third that I want you to point out to you is he's still to this day the all-time leader for the Boston Red Sox, fabled organization, in lowest ERA of all time. His career ERA while he was with the Red Sox was 1.99. Then he went to the Indians, had a little bit of pitching with them. His ERA, if you combine the two, was 2.03. That's third best in the history of modern day Major League Baseball, modern day being from 1901 on. Now, in my opinion, that's Hall of Fame stuff. It's not the Hall of Fame, should be. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Anyway, I don't want to bore you with a lot of details about the Wood family history, but I think we need to answer the question, why Ouray, where the Wood family was, how they got here. Way back in 1830, the Wood family, his distant relatives, bought a tract of land in Shahola, Pennsylvania. They actually bought 240 acres for $480, by the way. That's, if I do my math right, that's $2 an acre. And his dad, John F., who I will refer to him as, was born in Shahola. He actually earned a law degree from the University of Pennsylvania. And in 1879, John F. moved the family, or actually he moved by himself, I'm sorry, to Ness City, Kansas. Came out west. And he formed and published the Ness City Times newspaper. He was very successful there. He was an attorney, very involved in real estate as well as politics, and he was a school teacher. He actually taught a 14-year-old girl named Rebecca Stevens, and 4 years after having her as a student, when she turned 18 and he was 30, he married her, and that became Joe's mom. While he was in Ness City, he also had a son named Harley, who was Joe's big brother. Several years later, the family moved to Kansas City, Missouri, and Howard Ellsworth Wood, our subject this evening, was born on October 25th of 1889. So we're going back a ways. The family then moved to Chicago when Howard, or Joe as he will become, was 3 in 1893. If you remember, in 1893, the Chicago World's Fair was there. So the family goes to the World's Fair, and they see 2 clowns at the World's Fair. Their names were Joy and Petey. And as we so often do as parents, you see 2 clowns they find to be really funny. What do? You name your boys after them. So Howard, who was 3 at the time, became Joe, and Harley, who was 6, became Pete, and that's what they went by the rest of their lives. So Joe actually, in 1950, which would have made him either 60 or 61, legally changed his name to Joe, but his real name was Howard his whole life. So while they were in Kansas and Chicago, John F., his dad, amassed a huge amount of wealth. He actually made a lot of money in real estate, but he was really adventurous and a real risk taker, and he lost a lot of money in real estate. So he pretty much lost everything he had. I've read, I find it hard to believe because this number is just outrageous, but I've read he actually made up to $250,000 at one time. And, but it wasn't worth much by the time he left the city. He was very adventurous, and in 1898, he took the family back to Shohola, Pennsylvania, to his family, or he actually sent him back there, while he took off and mined for gold in Alaska for quite some time. And the money they did have left, he blew the majority of that, not making any money gold mining. And he finally came back in 1899, went back, picked up the family, and brought them back for just a short stay in Ness City, and made his way on to Colorado from there. His wife, Becca's sister, younger sister, was moving to Colorado. So they were coming out with her brother, and that was part of it. They jumped on the train from Kansas City to Denver with them, and then they took a 2-horse driven wooden carriage from the rest of the way from Denver to Ouray. So I'm thinking to myself as we're driving up yesterday from Denver, how long would that take to, in the winter time too, to come all the way up here? They started, by the time they got partway up here, it was winter time. I was sitting in traffic though coming up. My wife and I were on our way up, and we hit this big, just stop. We didn't move for over 20 minutes, and I really was thinking at that time, maybe a horse-drawn carriage wouldn't be so bad. But anyway, that's how they came. They get to Delta, and the sister and her husband stopped there, and they farmed there for years. But they went on to Ouray, the rest of the family did. They got as far as Dallas, Colorado, which people in this room may be familiar with that. I've never heard of it. But they stayed in what Joe called was a shack in Dallas, which is about 13 miles from here, right outside of Ridgeway. So if you're sitting there at the ball field, and that guy that's wanting to know who Smoky Joe is starts asking you detailed questions, and he brings up, I wonder what Smoky Joe was doing on Y1K, on the New Year's Eve Y1K? He was living in a shack in Dallas, Colorado. That's where they were with the turn of the new century. So why did they come to Colorado? They went on from there and came to Ouray, but why did they come from Colorado? From what I can tell, I think it was a combination of the sister coming to Ouray and them thinking, here's an opportunity. But his dad being very adventurous, liked the idea of maybe there being some gold here and doing some mining. So he came out for the adventurous part of it. And he did end up, while he was here, doing some attorney work for the mining industry. But he actually, I'll get to a little bit more about him in a minute. But they, despite the fact he's an attorney and he'd had all the success before, while they were in Ouray, the family was really poor. And shortly after they got here, he took off for both California and Nevada to go gold mining again. And he left the family over by the museum over here. We went over to the house last night, 342 7th Avenue, is this beautiful big greenhouse. And they had some safe houses behind them. And they lived in the third safe house behind it, which I understand isn't there anymore. But he left the family there in a safe house, and he took off for quite some time. And, I've read some heart-wrenching letters that Joe actually wrote to his dad where, he's saying, send money, we don't have anything. And so, while they're out here, as poor as they were, and as much as his dad would leave at times, he never held that against his dad. He admired him. He loved his adventurous spirit. And every interview I heard him have later on in life, he really spoke highly of his father. So, very proud of him. So he later moved after he got back and things were settling down to a home on 5th Street. And Ouray back then had a population of about 2,000 people, about twice what it has now. And there were about 15 to 20 saloons, which is a big part of the town. There's wide open gambling. There was, shall we say, a pretty prevalent red light district. So it was a wild time back then, town back then. And come 1903, John F., his dad, actually opened up and published the Ouray Times newspaper. The Plain Dealer was already here, so he's kind of, I suppose, in a sense, competing with them. But one thing he did when he was running that paper during the short time he did, is he really went against gambling in the town. And shortly after, he ran some big articles about, you know, we need to get rid of gambling and so forth. They actually did ban gambling in the town, and his dad took a lot of credit for that. He sold his interest in the paper later on that year, so that was 1903. One thing about that time here, I got this quote from a letter that Joe they came across, and he says, "I was born with a baseball in my hand. That's all I thought of. That's all I used to do as a kid was play ball." And man, does that ring home for me. That sounds like me as a kid. But anyway, he went on to say, except for making a few nickels and dimes, we were so darn poor. But Joe had a number of ways that he made his nickels and dimes, I believe, here. He actually picked raspberries that he sold to the drugstore for $1 a bushel. He carried special deliveries to the post office, worked in the butcher shop for $4 a week. He sold popcorn, shine shoes, and set type at his dad's newspaper during the time he had the newspaper. He and his brother Pete would walk the alleys looking for pop bottles that they could sell, or bottles, I don't know if they called them pop bottles back then. Anyway, quite a resume for a kid that wasn't even 16 yet that he built while he was here. I want you to play, this is a really good clip from years ago of Smoky Joe himself speaking of his time in Ouray. And I love this clip. Go ahead, John, and play that.
I see these Wild West pictures in the movies and on TV and so on. Now, when we lived in Colorado, Larry, we went through all that in real life. There's big stagecoaches with the guards sitting up with their rifles on the back end, guarding gold bullion coming down from the mines. We saw all that in real life. All of that.
It's just a movie to me.
Of course, they enlarged a little of it. In all the years that we were out there, which was 5 years, and I used to see these big buses every day coming down from the mine with 2 men on there with their rifle, 6-horse team, of course. But all the ones you see now, the horses are just running like hell. I never saw them off the trunk.
I like that. You know, you do see in the movie just run at full speed all the time. Is that still right there? Okay, there we go. So let's talk about his baseball when he was in Ouray. Joe's uncle had taken credit for initially teaching Joe to play baseball back when he was in Chicago. But his real start in baseball came when he was in Ouray. His first organized baseball team was when he was here. He played at Felon Park, which was on the northern edge of town, and it was built there because it was the only flat land they had in town that had enough room for a baseball field there. The baseball field, by the way, for anybody that doesn't know, in 2007 was renamed the Smoky Joe Wood Field. So that was a nice honor for him. When Joe first started out on the team, he was only 12 years old, but they made him the bat boy and the team mascot. This is a team, keep in mind, that was made up of pretty much 18-year-olds or older. But they realized right away that he was a special player. And this, let's back up to that other picture. There he is on the bottom left, where they're cradling in his arm, back when he was probably about 12 or 13, the team picture there. But like I say, they eventually made him a utility infielder and a little bit of a pitcher at a pretty early age. He recalled his first time he finally got to get up to bat with the team, and he said, "I was shaking like a leaf playing with these men, and I struck out on 3 pitches that were way over my head." Even though he was younger than the older guys, he still threw harder than most of them. By the time he was even 13, he was starting to throw harder. By the time he was 14 or 15 here, I've read where the other players on teams, these men, were scared to go up to bat against him even at that age. So, let's see, by 1905 then, go ahead, yeah, thank you. By 1905, when he was 15, he finally became somewhat of a star amongst much older players. That year, Ouray was winning games against teams to the north, like Olathe, Grand Junction, Montrose, but they lost 4 out of 5 to their arch rival Silverton, which was sponsored by the noted politician and saloon keeper Jack Slattery. So I don't know if anybody's heard of him, but I guess they had quite a team back then. So here's a kind of a fun little story that after losing a game to Montrose in 1905, the locals, there were a lot of rumors from the locals that the Ouray team had thrown the game. There's a lot of gambling on the games back then. And I think that was always the case, even through the early 1900s. The local teams always had a lot of betting going on against them. Not typically throwing the games, usually betting on them to win the games. So, after a game in July of 1905, the Ouray Plain Dealer newspaper referred to Joe as the 16-year-old wonder of the San Juan, whose performance endeared him to the hearts of every fan. He was actually 15, but that's a pretty good quote to tell you the kind of performance he was having against 18 and 20-year-olds, and people in their 20s. His older brother, Pete, who was 18 or 19 then, also played on the team. Joe recalled at that time that after they'd win a home game, the fans would slip money through the backstop to the players, and most of the team would get free drinks at the saloon, but he was the only player not old enough to drink. So, let's see, Chase and Hebler, Chase and Hebler Saloon would give him free meals since he didn't get the drinks. But even though he was too young to drink, he actually spent a lot of time at Hiram Hare's pool and beer room, and actually became the best pool player in the whole bar. And he was, like he said, no older than 15. His grandson later on in life said he was a world-class pool player. So picked that up while I was here in Ouray. He wrote in a letter about his time in Ouray. As a boy, I had nothing on my mind but baseball, as I mentioned before. I was just a little snot-nosed kid who was running around and knew who all the people were, but they didn't know who I was. Every so often, the Walshes, who probably most people in this room made millions from the Camp Bird mine, used to come back to town, and along with their daughter Evelyn, would throw out nickels and dimes to the kids who would follow them down the street. That was an exciting time in Joe's life. Next slide. So, in the fall of 1905, when Joe turned 16, the family returned to Ness City, which is where Becca was from. John practiced law again there, and his mom, Becca, had just been miserable in her time in Ouray, them being so poor, her husband being off mining for gold or whatever all the time. So they got out of town then, and let's see, the one thing that I found interesting in everything I've researched on him, and before I was asked to do this, I thought I knew a lot about Smoky Joe Wood, but I found out there's so much more to know about anybody in research. But the neat thing about him is he talked all the time about his time in Ouray. There's a book out called Smoky Joe Wood, The Biography of a Baseball Legend. And the author dedicates 13 whole pages to his time in Ouray, and he hardly mentions his time in Kansas or Chicago. And it's the same way with Joe. He talks about his time in Ouray all the time. I think it really had a big impact on him. So in 1906, he's playing ball for the Ness City team, and a barnstorming team of ladies called the Bloomer Girls would go around the nation. This team was called the National Bloomer Girls, and they were out of Kansas City. But they came to Ness City to play, and they'd have exhibitions, and they'd sell them out, and they were actually pretty successful most of the time. They were very competitive. They usually had 3 or 4 men on the team. Most of them would dress up in wigs and try to pass themselves off as women. But, Joe says, I don't think, he's made the comment of something like, some of those rude farm boys might have bought it, but I don't think most people did. But anyway, they come to town and play Ness City, and Ness City beats them 23-2. And after the game, they approached Joe and said, would you mind quitting your team here and traveling with us the rest of the summer? And they offered him $21 a week to go with them. His comment to that was, my God, that's a lot of bucks. So he never wore a wig for him. His name was never reported in the paper as Joe Wood. It was actually reported at times as Lucy Totten. But he spent the rest of the summer playing baseball for this girls' team. And anyway, so the next season, a friend of his brother was playing baseball and football at the University of Kansas. And his brother had a friend there who had played professional baseball. And he got him a contract to play for a team in Hutchinson, Kansas in 1907 when he was 17. So that's when he first became a pro. And he'd only been playing shortstop for the team. They didn't realize what they had with him as a pitcher. I think he'd been asking to pitch a lot. Finally, they put him in as a pitcher. The first batter he faces, he hits him in the ear, and the kid goes to the hospital for 3 days, supposedly, as the story goes. But anyway, that day, he won the game 2-0, and he struck out 17 batters, supplanted his position as a pitcher with the team. The next season, 1908, he started the season in Kansas City playing pro ball, and a teammate after one of the games in Kansas City had a date, and he was getting ready to go out, and he finds out that his date's got another date, another girl with her. So he asked Joe, would you mind joining me on the date? We've got a date for you too. Well, they go out. He likes the other guy's date a lot better than him, talks him into switching, and that girl's name was Laura O'Shea, and she's the woman he later on would marry and spent the rest of his life with. On August 5th of 1908, the Boston Red Sox, and this, by the way, is the year that the Red Sox changed their name from the Boston Americans to the Boston Red Sox. But that year, that day is when they purchased his contract from the Kansas City team and brought him up to play Major League Ball for the Boston Red Sox. So he came up at 18 years old. He was the youngest player in the major leagues when he got called up. And he'd never been to a major league stadium or to a major league game at that point in his life. Another player, at the same time he got called up, a couple of days earlier, got called up as well, who became his roommate and his lifelong best friend. And that was a guy by the name of Tris Speaker, who's a Hall of Famer and one of the all-time great Major League Baseball players. So that was 1908. He only threw 22 innings that year at the end of the year. But 1909 and 1910 come along, and he always had a lot of injuries. In 1909, he starts out breaking his foot, so he missed a lot of time. But in those 2 seasons, he had ERAs of 2.18 and 1.69. Now, to give you an example of what that means, in 2024, last season, the Major League average ERA was 4.15, and back in 1910, at that time, the average ERA was 3.37. So he's coming in at half what the other, he's 19 and 20, and his ERA is phenomenal. It's one of the best in the majors even then. 1911 comes along, and he has what was basically a Hall of Fame kind of year. He threw a no-hitter, which means he threw a complete game, pitched the entire game, and didn't give up a base hit to anybody on the other team. He also threw 2 one-hitters and 2 two-hitters that season. Won 23 games, struck out 231 batters, and had a 2.02 ERA. And he also set a record by striking out 15 batters in one game. Nobody in the majors had ever done that. And he led the league in strikeouts per 9 innings. That's a major, incredible stats for one season. Another thing about that season is the All-Star games didn't start till 1933. The first official game. But there was a guy named Daddy Joss who was a great pitcher, Hall of Fame player, died during that season. Not from baseball injury, but he died from something else. They had the first All-Star game where the Cleveland team took on all the best players, rest of the best players around the league. And Smoky Joe was named to that team. And that was the first time they ever had a group of All-Stars together. So already at 21 years old, he's on the All-Star team there. 1912 comes along, as I mentioned earlier, arguably the best season a pitcher's ever had. And when I say that, I want to combine the hitting that he did too with that, stress that part of his game. But I'll reiterate his stats from that year quickly. He was 34 and 5, 1.91 ERA, batted 290, only 22 years old. Here we go. One thing about that season, I mentioned Walter Johnson earlier. So Walter Johnson, during that season, has got a record going of 16 wins in a row without a loss. And Smoky Joe at that time had 13 in a row without a loss. And so they're getting ready to play each other in about a week. And the newspapers are billing this like a big prize boxing fight. they're putting in, pictures of the two of them next to each other, stats, versus each other, arm length, like a boxer would be, all that kind of stuff. Height and weight. By the way, he was 5'11" and 3/4 and 180 pounds. So they're really building up the hype for this game, and it's just getting to be huge. Walter Johnson's last start before that, he actually lost the game. But it's still, they packed Fenway Park. In fact, it was so full, if you see pictures from that game, fans are lined up on the field, out in the outfield and along the sidelines, overflowing inside the screens and the fences. So as it turns out, in that game, Smoky Joe beats him 1-0. And it was a huge deal, just really, really high. And that's a picture of Walter Johnson with him right there, who, was considered to just be the greatest pitcher back then. Smoky Joe went on to win his next 2 games and tied him for the record at that time of 16 wins in a row without a loss. The Red Sox go on that season to win the pennant, American League pennant. And game 1 of the World Series, he's their ace, he's their pitcher. And he goes into the 9th inning of that game with a 4-3 lead, and the Red Sox, or the Giants, New York Giants, get 2 runners on. They're on 2nd and 3rd with 1 out. And he faces Art Fletcher, who'd only struck out 29 times the entire season, strikes him out, then strikes out Doc Crandall to end the game, and they win game 1 of the World Series. Later, partway through the series, he wins game 2, another start. So they actually played 8 games in that World Series because one of the games ended in a tie with darkness. And rather than just starting it up the next day, they just called it a tie. So they're going into game 8 with the records 3-3-1. And the winner of game 8 wins the whole World Series. So they're in the 8th inning of that game. Smoky Joe comes in to pitch and pitches the last 3 innings of that game. And there was a couple of famous blunders that us baseball fans all know about. There are 2 characters named Fred Merkle and Fred Snodgrass. And Fred Snodgrass is playing center field in the 10th inning of that game. And they hit a fly ball to center field, the Giants did. And Snodgrass calls off the left fielder, who's probably got a better shot at the ball, and drops the fly ball. The runner comes on in to score. It's a famous game in the history of baseball, especially being the last game of the World Series. And Smoky Joe gets the win, gets credited for the win. And that was his 3rd win of the World Series. He was the first pitcher to ever do that. To this day, nobody else has ever won more than 3. In fact, that was also 1968, the last time any pitchers ever won 3 games. Mickey Lolich did that for the Tigers back then, which was 57 years ago. So, anyway, during that off season after the 1912 season, he'd made some money finally, and he goes back to Chehalis, Pennsylvania, that I mentioned before, and he builds the family, for his parents and everybody, the whole family, a real big home in Chehalis. And he funded it, and he did a lot of the work himself, personally on it. So 1913 comes along. He's considered probably to be the best pitcher in baseball right now. And during spring training, he falls and breaks his thumb. And then he tries to come back too early from that before his arm's ready. And he had some serious, serious arm problems. And he pitched the rest of his career with this really affecting him. So 1913 or 1914, he was out injured a lot, didn't play all that much, but now he's learned not to throw the smoke past batters, but he's learned how to throw strikes and hit the corners and be just an effective pitcher. He had ERAs those 2 years of 2.29 and 2.62, way below the major league average. The winner of 2013, by the way, in December, he was married to Laura O'Shea, who I mentioned before, that he'd gone on the date with, and he'd had a 1-year-long engagement before that. They remained married the rest of their lives. So 1915 comes, and his arm's killing him by then. And a lot of people will tell you that what he did in 1915 was the most impressive thing he did in his entire career. He actually, players would say he'd go to dinner and he couldn't even use his right arm to eat dinner at times. And and they couldn't back then diagnose torn rotator cuffs, and they certainly couldn't repair them if you did have one, but Later on in life, they actually went in and were actually able to go into his arm and say he had a rotator cuff tear right here, and through the rest of his career. But he did some amazing things despite that season. One game, he threw 11 shutout innings during a week that his shoulder was just killing him. He won 9 games in a row without a loss at one point, and finished the year 15-5 with a 1.49 ERA. He actually led the American League in both of those stats, ERA and win percentage. So the next year, well, actually, that year the Red Sox went to the World Series again, won the World Series 4-1. But by that point in the season, his arm was hurting so bad, he didn't get into the World Series. So 1916 comes along, and first of all, his best friend, Tris Speaker, who he'd roomed with his whole time with the Red Sox, gets traded to the Indians. And by the way, Tris Speaker, if you don't know who he is, he's still the all-time Major League Baseball leader in doubles, considered to be one of the greatest outfielders in the history of the game. Through his entire life, this was his best friend. So the Red Sox get to spring training after he led the league in ERA and win percentage and offered him a $5,000 pay cut from his salary the year before. And a combination of him holding out because he said, I'm not going to play for that. It's an insult after what he'd done. And his arm really bothered him, and quite honestly, reading between the lines, he probably wouldn't have been able to pitch much. Maybe the Red Sox knew what they were doing there after him. But he sat out the entire season and missed the 1916 season. He also, during that season, while he was off, had his first child, a son named Joe Jr. So in February of 2017, he was traded from the Red Sox to the Cleveland Indians, the same team that Tris Speaker had been traded to. And the owner that traded him was a guy named Harry Frazee, who was a real tight owner with the Red Sox. And he's been infamous for years, 2 years later, for selling their star player, Babe Ruth, to fund his opera house. And if you've ever heard the term, the curse of the Bambino, they said that somebody put a curse on the Red Sox. They were so mad about him selling Babe Ruth. And the Red Sox went 86 years after that without ever winning the World Series. So he did the same thing to Smoky Joe that he did with Babe Ruth. So anyway, just to kind of summarize his time in Boston, his injuries that kept him from being possibly the greatest pitcher ever. He had a broken blood vessel in his ankle. He broke his toe. He had appendicitis. Arm problems from slipping on the wet grass that I mentioned before. Broke his thumb. And tried to pitch too soon. Got really, really bad medical help from some witch doctors that somebody had sent him to. They made things worse instead of better. So anyway, he went through all that when he was with them. Also, another thing about his time with the Red Sox, 2 of his teammates there, besides just Tris Speaker, were Babe Ruth and Cy Young was another one of them. And Cy Young, now to this day, if the best pitcher in baseball every season is awarded what they call the Cy Young Award. So those were 2 of his roommates, or teammates while he was there. So he goes back to the Indians. Once again, his new roommate is Tris Speaker. And through his entire 14-year career for Smoky Joe, he never had another roommate than Tris Speaker. So that's kind of a neat fact. If they ask you at the ball field, you can point that out. 1917 season, he's still got a really bad arm. And he only threw 5 games all year. He actually approached the Indians owners, who he's feeling bad because they paid $15,000 for him. And he can't pitch hardly. And he asked them to cut his salary for the season. They said, no, we're honoring it. We gave you that. We have confidence you're going to come out and still be a good player for us. So he gets to 1918 spring, and his arm's still really bothering him. And he suggested moving to be a position player. So they try him out at first base, second base, and outfield. And again, pitchers were historically, they always have been, they still are, other than maybe Shohei Ohtani, but they're historically bad hitters. But it worked out, and they almost immediately move him into the starting lineup that year as a hitter. He's playing mostly outfield, a little bit of second base. So there's only been in the history of time of Major League Baseball that I can count and that I've been able to find maybe 4 players that have made the switch from pitcher to hitter that were actually quite successful at both. It just doesn't happen. Babe Ruth being the most famous, of course. So anyway, he goes into that 1918 season, and he plays in 119 of their 127 games. It was a shortened season because of World War I. But anyway, some of the things he did that season, he reached base in 11 straight at-bats, which is really an amazing feat. He batted .296 to finish 10th in the league. He was 6th in the league in home runs, and he had 66 runs batted in to tie him for 3rd in the league with Babe Ruth. So right off the bat, had a phenomenal year for him. Then winter of 1919 comes along, and he smashes his ring finger of his left hand loading railroad ties, and it affected him for most of that season. Partway through that season, by the way, I'll just throw out that Tris Baker, who was playing on as a teammate with him, becomes player manager for the Indians and managed in the rest of his career as well. Another famous incident from that season happened when, this is one that baseball fans will know, there's one player in the history of baseball that has been hit by a pitch and actually died from it. And it was his teammate Ray Chapman, hit by a pitch by Carl Mays. Both of them had been teammates of his, but Smoky Joe was the first guy on the field, picked up Ray, took him off the field. He died the next day, and Ray was a pallbearer, Smoky Joe was a pallbearer at his funeral. So a lot of the real famous incidents from the time he played, he was right there involved with in the middle of it. So 1921 comes along, and he had just a fabulous season hitting. As late as September 3rd of that season, less than a month to go in the season, he was batting .406. Now there hasn't been a player that's batted .400 in Major League Baseball since 1941 when Ted Williams did it. But he's hitting .406 that year. He slumped the last 3 weeks of the season and only hit .366, but still .366 is just a phenomenal batting average. He also had 66 RBIs that year, but he only was up 194 times through injuries. If you prorate his 194 at-bats that season to the same number of at-bats that the all-time RBI leader had, which was Hack Wilson in 1930, he actually would have had more RBIs than the all-time leader, just to show you what kind of season he had. 1922 comes along, it's his final season, and he had a great year. He actually had a 17-game hitting streak in July that year. His last game of that year was September 24th, and in that game, he got a single in his last at-bat. It went to Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth bobbled the ball. He went from second to home on the bobble, beat the Yankees and Babe Ruth to win that game, his last game ever. So he was, at that point in his career, he was really playing well and having some of his best seasons. But he decided to retire, and he took a job to coach at Yale, and he wanted to be home with his family. He said he'd come home from a road trip, and his babies didn't know who he was. There was no Hall of Fame at that point in time. A lot of players now, they realize the ramifications of, if I stick it out a few more years, it might mean making the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame didn't come on until later. If it had been, he might have played a few more, get himself in that position. He's always been a bubble borderline player for making it anyway. Another year or two, like the last couple of years he has, I think he would have made it. But anyway, he did have, like I say, a lot of injuries through his career. If you want to go back up to the previous one, he had a lot of injuries, but he really took pretty good care of himself. He was just a moderate drinker, unlike his teammates Cy Young and Babe Ruth, who were historically known for being big drinkers. But go ahead and play the clip that he talks about the things going on back in his day.
Well, I don't think there's any more of them than there is now. The biggest trouble with all the youngsters with baseball are probably the other things, chasing women. And when you could have your phones taken out of it and you're ragged. That was the big thing. And I don't think there's any more of them than there is now. Is there?
So he was basically saying there, the drinking, you know, you hear about baseball in the 1910s and 20s and how rowdy it was and how the players were just such big drinkers and boozers. And I've heard this from other players. He says it wasn't any more than it was now. When he spoke at that time, he was 76 years old. 76 years old when he spoke there. So we're looking at 1960, something when he said that. But his point being, he said there was a lot of chasing women back then. He said, I don't know if you could hear that, but it was a little not as clear. But he said the drinking wasn't really that prevalent. So go ahead and go forward a couple of slides. How long are we getting here? I better cut out this part. Why don't you play that? He said Ty Cobb
was the greatest ball player that ever lived, and he figured that the other ball players should do things as well as he did, and they couldn't do it. And for that reason, he was a bad manager.
So he's basically saying Ty Cobb was the greatest player that ever lived. He actually liked Ty Cobb. A lot of players did. Ty Cobb gets a bad rap now as being a really bad guy, but he was good friends with him and liked him a lot. So anyway, he goes to Yale. He gets the position as assistant varsity coach, and he's also the head freshman coach. So why don't you play that next clip as well here. This is the only clip of him actually pitching. He's just throwing batting practice at Yale, but at least you get to see him.
It's the first day, so take it easy. Okay.
So that's kind of fun, just seeing a video of him actually playing ball back then. His first season at Yale, his freshman team went 11-0. They had a week left in the season, and they made him the varsity head coach already. And they go into a quick little series that they do every year. It was called the Big Three Championship, where Yale would play Dartmouth and Harvard. And the winner of that would win the Big Three Championship. So he took them over just in time to do that, and they won the Big Three Championship with him coaching. So he was pretty successful as a coach. After 20 seasons coaching there, in 1941, he was fired after the season as a cost-saving measure, or World War I or II had started at that point. So they got rid of him. His record coaching was 285 wins, 230 losses over 20 seasons. And he won 8 Big Three championships. Yale was big time stuff back then. It's not, athletically not as big now, but that was as big as it got for sports back at that time. I've read a lot, as you're reading things, I've read a lot of things that are false when I'm reading about Smoky Joe. And I've read newspaper articles that they write about him, and they say that he coached George Bush Sr. when he was there. And George Bush, as most of you know, played first base for Yale. He didn't play there until 1945 till 1948, and Joe was gone after 1941 season. But he did coach 3 of George's mom's sons, all 3 of them when they were there at Yale. After he got fired, he moved to California for 7 years and joined his brother Pete opening a golfing range. And he said during those 7 years, he made more money than his entire coaching and baseball playing career. And then moved the family back after that to New Haven, where he'd been living in, where Yale was. During his career, he only had 1 endorsement contract. The players now live off those. And Regal Shoes paid him with a dozen pairs of shoes. No money, just a dozen pairs of shoes. And the ad read, "The whole world loves a winner. How would you like to be in Joe Wood's shoes? Smoky Joe wears Regal shoes." So, always a little corny, but it's kind of neat. Go ahead. Yeah, here we go. So 1938, a little bit about his family. The family in 1938 bought a permanent home in New Haven at 90 Marvel Road. Prior to that, they would always go back to Shohola during the winter when he played and during the summers when he coached. And triggered from his years in living in Ouray, he was a huge hunter and fisherman. Later in life, he really lost his desire to hunt and quit and never did it again. But he had a hunting club in Shohola that he called Indian Club, named after the Cleveland Indians. And he would bring his teammates, such as Chris Speaker and them, to hunt out there with him. In 1938, the same year he bought the home in New Haven, his mom, Becca, had died. And she'd been estranged, by the way, from his dad, John F., for quite some time before that. And his dad in 1944 died at the age of 89, I'm sorry. And they were buried next to each other in Shohola at the graveyard there. Joe and Laura had 3 sons. That's Smoky Joe with his 3 sons. That's their family. They also had a daughter and loved the haircuts. So His son, Joe Jr., actually played ball for him at Yale. And he was signed after the 1941 season at Yale by the Red Sox as well, and was a really good pitcher. In his first pro game, he threw 7 shutout innings for Scranton. A few weeks later, he threw a no-hitter there. 1944, he got called up to the majors, threw 3 games, had arm problems just like Dad, never got a pitch again. He pitched against his brother Steve, who was at Colgate, and Steve was also, the other 2 sons both had to go off to the war, but after 3 years in the war, his other son Steve got signed by the Red Sox, but he never made it to the majors. This is a neat story. 1940, after the 1940 baseball season ended, he was still coaching at Yale. He loaded the family in 2 Chrysler Imperials. He never drove anything but Chrysler products. And they started out going to Kansas City, checked out a few other Kansas towns, but he wanted to show his family where he'd grown up and where the impacts on his life. So they drove through a nighttime rainstorm along the $1 Million Highway from Durango to Ouray, stayed at the Beaumont Hotel, and visited the bird mine while they were here during that time. He had one regret from the trip. I think he had big expectations that got here. He said, I hardly knew anybody. And he really regretted that part of it. So, but that's a good story. Let's see. He did really well financially. Later in life, he had some really valuable stocks. His kids said he was extremely tight with the money. He'd cut coupons. He'd shop various stores till he found the best price on something. He was also, when he came up with the Red Sox at 18 years old, he had a reputation for having a real foul mouth that I'm sure he got at Hiram Harris Beer and Pool Hall here in Ouray. Bad influences there. But anyway, they said he was just rough around the edges. But later in life, he was a really sharp dresser, always had a coat and tie on when he'd sit down to dinner, just dressed sharp all the time, kept his home really immaculate and tidy, and quite a transition for that unpolished kid that he was to later on in life. He was a big golfer, and he never had a hole-in-one until he was 60-something. A week later, he had his second hole-in-one, and he ended up having 4 during his lifetime. So, great athlete, obviously. His wife, Laura, died in 1979 at 89 years old. So, anyway, let's go to the next slide. I love this story. At 92 years old, this is a kid from Ouray. 92 years old, he broke his thumb when he fell off the roof repairing a leak on the end of his house. Second time he broke the same thumb he broke when he was younger. So, despite being a high school dropout, he received an honorary doctorate of humane letters from Yale in 1984. It was presented to him by Bart Giamatti, who's the actor Giamatti's dad, and became baseball commissioner in 1989. But anyway, Joe, when they presented it to him, had Alzheimer's, but he was really emotional. He understood what was going on and got really emotional during the ceremony. Joe and Cole Porter were the only 2 people at that time that Yale had ever given doctorate degrees to, honorary doctorates. There have been more since, but he was only the second one ever. So I hope I'm making an impression of what an important guy this really is. That's pretty cool stuff. When he played ball, the average lifespan of an American was 39 years old. He died in 1985 when he was 95 years old. He was the oldest living ex-Major League Baseball player at that time. So he comes up as the youngest player at 18, died as the oldest ex-Major League player. So that's kind of a neat thing. He was living in New Haven at the time, but he was buried in the family cemetery at Shohola. That cemetery is still preserved, and a guy stopped in and saw Maria at the museum the other day, and his family's land, or his land, butts right up next to what would have been Smoky Joe's land that they just sold a few years ago. But he said the cemetery is still there, been preserved. They had 160 acres instead of the 240 at the time they sold it. So some of the notoriety, some of the awards and recognition he's received. Pike County, Pennsylvania, where Shohola is, has Smoky Joe Wood still to this day every year on his birthday. People gather for several hours at Roman's Inn, Roman's Pub, it says there. But anyway, I love this picture. this is still a bowling alley that you can go play at, and you still go set up your own pins on it. So I'd like to go there, actually. The house he built burned down in 1991 there. There was a 1915 Cracker Jack baseball card of his that recently sold for $36,000. In 1995, he was inducted into both the Boston Red Sox Hall of Fame as well as the Colorado Sports Hall of Fame. He's also in the Kansas Hall of Fame and the Connecticut chapter of SABRE, our group, Society for American Baseball Research, which is a group that we develop a lot of stats that are beyond just your basic, wins and losses. We go into in-depth. We don't personally, but as an organization nationally, they do. We do more of the research of guys like Smoky Joe Wood and more of just having social events with friends of ours to talk baseball that we meet a lot. But anyway, the Connecticut chapter of SABRE is called the Smoky Joe Wood chapter. Play that next video.
Anything that I would rather have done.
Not very many men can say that.
In fact, as I've always said, my life has been a vacation. I would live all for nothing if I could afford it. And that's all I lived for when I was a kid, was to play baseball.
So he would have played ball for nothing, as if you didn't hear it. I love the quote. Now, I've got more to talk about. I don't know how long we want this to go. We've got, how long is this? Or should I be wrapping up now and taking questions? And is this about as long as they typically go? Yes. I've got other things we wanted, and I'm looking at the clock going, my gosh, we've gone in a hurry. Let me just finish up. I think you've heard enough about him. I was going to talk about some of the mountain town baseball Colorado history here. I think we've probably heard enough. You're probably all getting tired of hearing me. Should I go on a little bit? I can wrap this up in a few minutes, and then we got something we want to present here before. So I'll keep talking, and then we'll go on. So baseball had a really rich history in the Colorado mountain towns way back in the 1800s. The pioneers arrived during the Civil War and brought baseball out here to these places. In the 1890s, at the time before Smoky Joe even came here, they had baseball in towns like Ouray, Telluride, Silverton, Durango, and Creed, and even some of the smaller towns all had teams. They didn't necessarily have schedules. A few of them had schedules they played by, but they just arranged games. They said 4th of July was huge. You were either at home or on the road, but every team was playing ball on the 4th of July back then. In 1892, the San Juan Silverite wrote, if Irontons want to squander their money on the basis of 5-1 against the Ouray 9 next Sunday, they could find Ouray folks with wads sufficient to satisfy all comers. So, that was kind of a neat quote. Montrose was so upset about losing to Ouray that in the papers there, they accused Ouray of bringing players in from Denver, Golden, and Boulder, which Ouray emphatically denied and said, no, this was our team. But, this is a great quote by Smoky Joe that I really like. He said, the smaller the town, the more important their ball club was. Boy, if you'd beat a bigger town, they'd practically hand you the key to the city. And if you lost the game by making an error in the 9th inning, well, the best thing to do was just pack your grip and head for the road, because they'd never let you forget it. In places like Ouray, the teams carried with their bats the town's honor. I think they used to pack their grip and head for the road a little more back then than they do now. Whatever that means. I want to show you, let's go to the next slide here. Let's go to the next one. I want to go to, a group of us in the SABRE have been doing a lot of research on Colorado baseball history, players from Colorado. And we've got a whole website, backup one, because I think it shows the website on that one before, maybe not. Anyway, we've got a website on rmsabre.org, and it would be on the handouts that you've got there, but, where we've got a bio on every player that's ever been a native to Colorado. But we're getting ready to do the same thing with people like Smoky Joe, with impact players that weren't necessarily born here. But there were only 2 Colorado natives that have ever made the Hall of Fame. And if Smoky Joe Wood were rated, which there's a term called WAR, which is wins above the replacement, that they use to determine who the best players are. And if you use that These are the three players that stand out head and shoulders above everybody. It could be argued, where does he stand with the two? The other two are in the Hall of Fame, he isn't. But if you look at their stats up here, Smoky Joe's on the top. His win percentage is the best of all of them. His ERA, and again, it's different times, but if that ERA of 2.03, if you even take the ERA and smooth it out for today's game, he's still a way better ERA. He also had way more complete games, but that was the thing of the time. He had 28 career shutouts, which was phenomenal. Batters that reached base against him per inning. Walks and hits per inning, 1.087. Everything in the red is where he led. He didn't pitch as long as they did, near as many games and so forth, but his stats are certainly comparable, and I just think there's a real case to be made. Believe me, a number of people have tried over the years to get him into the Hall of Fame because, again, he's borderline of having made it. They've given it a lot of consideration, and it's just longevity that's kept him from ever getting there. Let's go to the next slide, which this is interesting. To talk about how difficult it is living in a mountain town and to make Major League Baseball. There's only been 8 native Coloradans that were ever born in mountain towns. 8 of them are up here, the 9th one I'll talk about in just a second. But these guys, Tom Hughes was a pretty good ball player back at the same time Smoky Joe was playing, from Coal Creek. But the rest of them, you probably maybe have heard of John Burke because the Rockies drafted him in the first round, but he only played a few games in the majors. But the rest of these guys, you've probably never even heard of. That's how difficult it is to make it to the major leagues, and these are the only mountain town people from there. I did throw up a picture of Mike Trujillo. He was a college roommate of mine. He played baseball at University of Northern Colorado, but he pitched 5 years in the majors. He's currently, may still, may not, but had a very successful real estate agency in Montrose, and I know he's still in Montrose, but whether he's still running the agencies, I can't say for sure. But 2 other guys in this area, Goose Gossage owns a home in Leadville, and y'all may know that Steve Carlton, you may know more than me, but Steve Carlton lived in Durango, one of the great pitchers for the Philadelphia Phillies, and I don't know if Steve's still there or not, but he was a few years ago still. So that's a little bit of some of the players that have been from here. I'm hurrying through this pretty quick. Colorado players, this site that we have, just for your information, there's just over 120 players that have ever played in the history of Major League Baseball that were natives of Colorado. Currently, there's 13 of them, which is quite a bit. 10 of those are pitchers. Pretty much, if you're making the majors anymore from Colorado, you're usually a pitcher. We've had 19 first-round draft picks, 4 second-round picks. The draft started back in 1965. So that's a little bit on that. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here, and I think let's open it to questions, and then I'm going to go ahead and make a presentation after we do the questions, or should I do the presentation? Let's open it up to questions. Is the mayor here?
The mayor is here.
You are here. Do you mind waiting for the questions you
No
need
problem.
to do? Let's open it up to any questions and answers or comments. If you want to correct me on everything, you can do that as well. Anything that's customary. Yes, sir.
You mentioned before, but I forgot already. What does AR?
WAR is wins above replacements. It's a very complex stat. It's actually a very, very accurate complex stat, but it's wins above replacement, which means they're comparing you to the average player in the game. If Matt Holliday is playing left field for the Rockies, and what would the average player playing left field for the Rockies at the same time, what would have he done? So Matt gets a plus or a minus of WAR versus what the average player would have done, and that's how they calculate it. They go very in-depth on that, and they put a number on every player with WAR. Bill James, I think. Am I right? Did Bill James come up with that? Yeah.
One of the good things about the WAR statistic is that it helps to compare players across generations, like Kurt Slide said. it's not up anymore, but there are 3 players from different times, and the WAR calculation helps kind of take a measure of how they did at that time against their peers, other players, how they've done against their peers maybe 50 years later.
They also have stats that level the playing field for your hitting stats at Coors Field versus other players. So they may dock you for having a high batting average at Coors Field. So there's a lot that goes into all these kind of advanced stats. That's a good question. Thank you. Yes, sir.
There's one slide I couldn't figure out where he has the world champion jersey.
Yes.
But his hat has a C on the hat.
That was Cleveland Indians.
So he did win.
I'm glad you brought that up. I had it in my notes, but I was kind of hurrying through things. They won the World Series thank you for bringing that up, because there's an important thing about that. When he was playing for the Indians in 1921, they won the World Series, and him and Babe Ruth are the only 2 players that have ever started in a World Series as both a pitcher and a position player.
There it is.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I completely forgot to mention that. Yes. Yes?
I mean, on one of the slides there, he's obviously sitting with whom I think is Honus Wagner and Walter Johnson, and then there's other slides where I think he's with Cy Young. Can you identify?
Yes, and it wasn't Honus Wagner, and it's funny you say that because I've had other people say that. That's Lefty Grove. Cy Young is the one that looks like Honus Wagner there. Lefty Grove's right there. That's Walter Johnson, and of course Smoky Joe right here. I should have been pointing those out. I kind of planned on it, but I knew I was going to be running late on that. I just had way too much to talk about. Thank you for bringing it up.
Anybody else? Raise your hand if you had heard of Smoky Joe Wood and his history in Ouray before you came here tonight. Good. Awesome.
I really appreciate all those of you that had never heard of him coming out tonight. I hope you leave here and feel like you do know the guy and know more about him and enjoy that. Thank you. He's a fascinating character. Thank you. I play guitar and sing, and I go to shows and do that. And it's so nice to have so many people in the crowd that are paying attention. And you made my night. You were really into it. You know your baseball, I can tell you. Yeah, you seem to understand. Good. I could tell that you knew your stuff. And I'm always that way where I got people in the crowd that are paying attention. It makes it so much easier to do your shows. I would like to have Mayor Funk come forward. And we're honored to have you in the front. Thank you so much for doing that. Kurt Wells, it's a pleasure. We have put together from Sabre something that you can do whatever you want with it in this city. We made it where it can be displayed outside. It's bronze plaque. And it states, Ouray is the boyhood home 1900 to 1905 of legendary Boston Red Sox and Cleveland Indians star Smoky Joe Wood. Red Sox career ERA of 1.99 is team's all-time record. 1912 season of one of the greatest in Major League Baseball history. 34-5 with 1.91 ERA. 3 World Series wins and a .290 batting average. Presented by the Rocky Mountain chapter of the Society for American Baseball Research. So that's the plaque we'd like to display. Whatever you want, what you want to do with that, okay.
It is an honor for me to take this plaque, and I'm hoping that we'll get this put up outside by the existing informational panel that's out in Fulton Park by Smoky Joe Wood Field. Just for a quick piece of information, I moved here in 2002 from Boston. And I, to this day, regret not taking a studio apartment that was across the street from Fenway Park with a view of field.
That would have been cool.
I'll kick myself for that forever.
Yeah.
But when I moved here, it took 5 years before I knew about Smoky Joe Wood even living here. It was in 2007 that the city renamed the field, and I was astonished that I had moved to a place where Smoky Joe Wood had lived in his his childhood it's basically started his career.
Right.
So I'm very excited to accept this plaque, and I'm very excited to live in Ouray.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you coming. We'll see you next time.
This was fun. Thank you, everybody, for coming.